I think most guys find out if their wife is cheating by coming home unexpectedly, overhearing a conversation, or finding evidence. In my case, it was simpler. My wife emailed me. Though unintentional, I figured her email program suggested my name, and she clicked without checking, a common mistake, especially when in a hurry. I was surprised to get a note from my wife after 18 years of marriage, titled, "About Yesterday." Since yesterday was a regular Wednesday, I wondered why Anne emailed me about it. Reading the message, she expressed how wonderful yesterday was and her anticipation for next week. She called herself Your Lady. I was at work all day on Wednesday, and as far as I knew, Anne was too. We didn't even talk on the phone. Despite her unusual cheerfulness when she came home, the betrayal was obvious. My first thought was to confront her in the evening, demand an explanation or a confession. However, being logical, I considered she might deny the letter's meaning, come up with an alternative explanation, or pass it off as a joke. What could I say? My unfounded accusations might not reveal anything. After thinking it over, I decided to wait. It would be interesting to see if Anne realizes her mistake and explains herself. If not, I've been warned and can use the information about her next date. Anne sells real estate, so her hours are irregular. She came home much later than me that night. I watched her closely, but her behavior seemed normal. If she knew the letter was a mistake, she didn't show it. I didn't hint that something was wrong either. The evening passed routinely, but I couldn't sleep. Instead, I analyzed the problem to untangle the knot. There might be a completely innocent explanation. Acting rashly could destroy our marriage, and I loved my wife. If the letter proved an affair, my marriage was under threat, and I needed to take action. The next morning, I went back to analyzing and contacted a detective agency to follow my wife. If she did nothing unusual on Wednesday, it wouldn't ease my fears, but I'd feel better. If my fears were justified, I'd find the truth and take appropriate measures. After doing everything I could at that moment, I put it aside and got back to work. Next Wednesday seemed normal. Anne and I left for work and returned home late. Nothing seemed abnormal in her appearance or behavior. I sat in my office reading stories and tried to hide signs of anxiety. On Thursday, I met with the detective agency. Although not very emotional, I could read emotions. The detective confirmed my suspicions with photos of Anne at a motel near the airport, entering a room with a man and leaving hand in hand. The detective told me it's always unpleasant to confirm suspicions. I thought for a minute and asked for help again. If the motel is their regular meeting place, I wanted photos of what's happening in the room. The detective agreed, mentioning I'd need to pay the motel manager. I nodded, and the proof would be paid. Back in my office, I couldn't concentrate on work. Now that doubts were removed, my ability to think seemed to disappear. I gave up working and focused on making plans. In addition to confirming my wife's infidelity, I understood why Anne accidentally sent the letter to me. I knew her lover, our neighbor, Mark Bradshaw. My name, McBishop, must have been suggested by the email program. Knowing Mark and his wife were our friends made the situation more painful. I had to do something, but the question was, what exactly? For hours, I went through various options, from revenge fantasies to begging Anne not to leave. Questions about the affair tormented me, but I finally decided on a plan to achieve my goals. I'm sorry, the detective said it's always unpleasant for us to confirm your suspicions. What do you want us to do now? After thinking for a minute, I told him I needed their help again. It seems the motel is their regular meeting place. If that's true, can you take photos of what's happening in the room? The detective didn't hesitate. We have a lot of experience getting such evidence. You might need to pay the motel manager for cooperation. If that's okay with you, we can guarantee results. I nodded. I'll pay for the proof. I went back to my office, but surprisingly, I couldn't focus on work. With all doubts removed, my ability to think seemed to vanish. In the end, I gave up working and concentrated on making plans. Besides confirming my wife's infidelity, I understood why Anne accidentally sent the letter to me, not him. I knew her lover, our neighbor, Mark Bradshaw. Since my name is McBishop, the email program must have suggested my name after Anne typed the first two letters. It's careless not to double-check, I thought, but emotions distract lovers. Knowing Anne's lover increased my sense of betrayal. Mark and his wife Bobby were our friends. We often had lunch or went to the movies together, and I never noticed a spark between Anne and Mark. Was I blind? Or were they good at deception? Anyway, I knew I had to do something. The question was what? For hours I went through various options. At times revenge fantasies flashed through my head, and I imagined begging Anne not to leave. Questions about why the affair began and how long it lasted tormented me. Anger and self-pity were intertwined. Finally, I decided I not only knew what I wanted, but had a good plan. My plan includes 2 separate actions happening simultaneously. I think of them as divide and conquer, separate 2 lovers and win her heart again. The first part uses my knowledge to drive a wedge between them. The second is an all-out campaign to win back Anne's love by becoming the perfect husband. I'll show her the downside of her relationship with Mark and the benefits of resuming a relationship with me. I made notes, listing actions, planning timing, and working out interdependencies. An essential element is keeping them in the dark about my knowledge. It requires restraint, but I felt I could do it. I wouldn't start until I got another report from the detective agency, but I could take steps to prepare. I bought a recording system for our home phones and a voice-activated device hidden in Anne's car. Tapping our home phone closed that communication channel. Although I couldn't tap her mobile, the car was likely where she'd call Mark. I wasn't worried about calls from work. She was unlikely to have a private conversation there. My next step was getting into Anne's email. Her home computer accessed her work email. She protected it with a password, but I knew where she kept passwords. It didn't take long to access it. I arranged for copies of all messages to be forwarded to me. Their affair seemed to be in the honeymoon stage, and my task was to end it as soon as possible. Now, I waited for the detective agency to prepare photos of their next meeting. Surprisingly, they presented video and audio along with the photos, an unpleasant surprise. Summoning my courage, I started observing their closeness moments. To my surprise, there was a display of tenderness and perhaps even love between them. The depth of their closeness was painful, making me question if my plan could really succeed. Regardless, with nothing to lose, I decided to press on. My wife, not very patient and adverse to disappointments, was a key target. I hoped to exploit this weakness to disrupt her relationship with Mark. Simultaneously, knowing her romantic nature, I saw an opportunity for another part of my plan. Having copies of all her emails gave me a clear advantage in planning my intervention. Their next email exchange provided all the information I needed to initiate the first part of my plan. Are we still on for Wednesday? Anne. Absolutely. One time, one place. I can't wait. Mark. On the day of their next date, I drove to Anne's office, parking discreetly. As soon as she returned from lunch, I casually walked past her parking lot, ensuring no one was around, and then ducked next to the car. In a minute, I unscrewed the valve cover on the tire, releasing the air. Then I drove back home, pondering what she would do without transportation at work. Sure enough, 20 minutes before Anne was supposed to meet Mark at the motel, she called me, asking for help. I assured her not to worry, and mentioned that my workload was light that day so I could fix her car. I explained that I just needed to finish one thing before heading over. I waited an additional 15 minutes before leaving, almost arriving at the scheduled time for Anne's meeting with Mark. When I got there, she was waiting by her car, expressing impatience. I apologized for the delay, explaining that the job took longer than expected. As Anne paced in despair, I changed her wheels slowly and methodically. I strategically parked my car behind hers, ensuring she couldn't leave until I finished. After putting on the spare tire, loading the flat one into the trunk, and returning after washing my hands, over an hour had passed since she was supposed to meet Mark. I apologized again, hoping it wouldn't negatively impact her relationship with the client. She resignedly stated, "He just has to understand." During the tire change, I noticed Anne's cell phone ringing several times, but she avoided answering, likely to sidestep a conversation with Mark in my presence. My suspicions were confirmed when I returned to my office and saw an excited correspondence between them. Mark had been waiting at the motel for over an hour, expressing frustration about the flat tire. I thought, good, realizing I had disrupted their plans a bit. That evening after dinner, I took Anne to the sofa, placed her feet on my lap, and provided her with a foot massage. I explained that I understood she had a challenging day and wanted to do something nice for her. Initially questioning my motive, she soon relaxed as I continued to work on her legs, and a pleased expression appeared on her face. Throughout the week, I waited before taking the next step. On Monday, a sizable floral arrangement with a postcard was sent to her office, expressing appreciation for the best wife a man can have. Although she might have hidden any remorse well, she warmly thanked me upon returning home, sharing the positive impression it made on her colleagues. Curious about the gesture, she inquired about the occasion, noting that I had never done anything similar before. I responded by hugging her and expressing my desire to change that pattern. I explained that the idea came to me when considering what might happen if she had a flat tire on the highway. I wanted her to know how dear her love was to me. She scrutinized me for a moment, but then hugged me tightly, saying, "That's so sweet of you, darling. It really means a lot to me." I couldn't help but wonder if she felt guilty. From her email, I learned that the lovers were planning a special meeting in a few days. I wanted to disrupt their plans, but this time I felt it might be suspicious if I messed up Anne's car again. So I let her go to the meeting place without hindrance, but followed her discreetly. While she entered the room Mark had booked, I drove around to the back of the motel and entered through the side door. The motel was modest enough, and there were no security cameras to record me turning on the fire alarm in the hallway. I waited outside until I saw the guests being taken to a safe spot in the parking lot. I didn't spot Anne and Mark, but I figured they were in the crowd, probably upset like wet chickens. Back in my office, I happily watched emails flying between the disappointed lovers. Anne, what nonsense. I'm so angry I'm about to scream. Mark, I'm sorry, but it's not my fault. Anne, next time choose a place that won't be a fire hazard. Yes, it looks like my Anne, I thought. When she arrived home from work, I noticed she was still upset. However, her mood shifted from tension to surprise upon seeing the dining table adorned with linen napkins and our fancy china. The aroma of her favorite dish cooking on the stove elicited mock disbelief as she looked at me. In response to her question about my sudden culinary efforts, I modestly explained that I had called her office in the afternoon. Learning that her client appointment was delayed, I assumed she wouldn't want to cook upon returning home. Although fear briefly crossed her face, she recovered quickly and expressed gratitude, saying, "That's so sweet of you, darling. You treat me so well." After dinner, I insisted that she not help with the dishes and escorted her to the office before turning on my favorite TV show. As I returned to the kitchen, I sensed her eyes on me and felt confident that my plan was progressing successfully. Despite any doubts Anne might have harbored about her affair, the next letter I intercepted from Mark made it clear that he remained undeterred. He expressed a desire for another encounter with my wife and planned to enhance the experience. Reading Mark's email, I cursed his persistence and regretted Anne's willingness to continue. It was evident that other actions were necessary. I waited until noon the day before their supposed meeting and called the Hyatt Hotel. I informed the clerk, identifying myself as Mark Bradshaw, that I needed to cancel my room reservation for the next day. The clerk assured me that my cancellation was helpful due to a large conference they had planned. Satisfied with this information, I decided to visit the Hyatt to observe what would transpire. Sitting with a view of the reception desk, I concealed myself behind a newspaper. A married couple arrived just in time, appearing affectionate and engaged in conversation. However, their mood shifted dramatically upon discovering they had no room. Mark expressed frustration, insisting that he had booked a room days ago. The clerk apologized, explaining that the order had been canceled. Mark attempted to make a new reservation, but the hotel was fully booked. Anne, visibly upset, urged him to leave. Disappointed, Mark followed her to the parking lot, attempting unsuccessfully to calm her down. Once both had left in their cars, I thought with satisfaction, "My work here is finished." When Anne returned home, I intercepted her at the door, informing her that we were leaving. Before she could object, I guided her to my car, opened the door for her, and took the driver's seat. Responding to her question about our destination, I smiled and mentioned that I had a little surprise planned for the evening. I turned on the radio to some quiet music, and we drove in silence. She observed me with curiosity, attempting to discern my plans. Visibly concerned, she inquired why we were coming to the Hyatt. In response, I winked and assured her that she would see. We entered the hotel elevator, and I selected the button for the top floor. Soon, We found ourselves in the rooftop restaurant at the Hyatt Hotel, known for its signature rotating dome. I provided the head waiter with my name, and he acknowledged our presence, stating that we had arrived just in time. Following that, he led us to a table on the outer edge, offering a view of the city lights. Curious, Anne asked suspiciously why I had chosen this place. I explained that there was no specific reason, just that I thought it would be a great setting for my pretty wife. She tensely smiled at the compliment. Inquiring further, she asked how I managed to get us a table, mentioning the big convention in town. I casually explained that it was not a problem. I had called that day and booked a table. Although Anne didn't react, I knew my success contrasted sharply with Mark's failure. Continuing, I mentioned that I had booked a table as soon as I found out about their rendezvous plans and took the liberty of ordering. She expressed her gratitude, saying she didn't mind. Thankful for my concern, she relaxed. Her delight increased as the waiter brought a bucket of ice and a bottle of champagne. After a few toasts, she cheered up. When the waiter brought oysters on half a shell, she was delighted. Internally, I acknowledged that I wasn't a big fan of oysters, but Anne loved them as the main course. The waiter then brought a salad of salmon niçoise with black olive sauce, impressing Anne. With a smile, she remarked that she thought I was going to order something heavy, like a big steak. I reassured her, saying that the salad was the perfect option, knowing she liked salads, and besides, we didn't want to eat too much. She looked at me questioningly, but I didn't provide any additional information. For dessert, the waiter brought 2 bowls of fresh raspberries with a spoonful of whipped cream and liqueur glasses filled with Grand Marnier. Anne thoroughly enjoyed it. Driving home, she unbuckled her seatbelt and snuggled up to me. The combination of drinks and oysters seemed to have the desired effect. Sensing she might be both upset and excited after the failures of her recent dates, I led her straight upstairs to our bedroom. I suggested she change into her nightgown while I took care of other things. As she turned to the closet, I quickly checked the guest bedroom to ensure everything was ready. Returning, I was pleased to see she chose a transparent black nightgown that concealed and revealed the curves of her body. Guiding her to the guest bedroom where scented candles burned around the open bed, I explained that touch and smell would be the only senses she needed that day. Placing a sleep mask over her eyes, I led her to the bed and undressed her, laying her on fresh linen sheets. Waving a bottle of almond butter under her nose, I instructed her to smell it. I poured some water into my hands to warm her up and began with a short foot massage. She moaned with pleasure, and I continued, gradually moving up to ensure she was completely relaxed. Focusing on her shoulders and arms, I turned her over and repeated the process on her back until she moaned again. Our shared pleasure reached its peak in a culminating moment before we collapsed. I removed the mask from her face, and it seemed she either fainted or fell asleep from exhaustion. Carrying her to our bedroom, I covered her with a sheet, and she quickly drifted off to sleep. After a brief sponge bath, I returned to bed, feeling satisfied with how the evening had unfolded. Anne and I typically followed different schedules, but she woke up early the next morning. Upon going downstairs, I found that she had already made coffee and breakfast. Her eyes sparkled as she expressed her gratitude for the special night. I responded, expressing my happiness that she enjoyed it and acknowledging that I would remember it for a long time. She gave me a smile, and I sensed that Anne and I were making real progress. Later that day, I intercepted an email confirming that Mark was still attempting to arrange a meeting with her. Mark apologized for the Hyatt Hotel incident, expressing confusion about losing his reservation. Anne replied, suggesting maybe it wasn't meant to be. Mark urged her not to give up and proposed spending Saturday together at their lake house since Bobby was leaving town. No booking issues, no fire alarms, just a hot time. Signed with love, Anne. Knowing Mac always plays golf on Saturdays, Mark suggested leaving while Mac is there. Mark eagerly anticipated being with Anne again. It was clear to me that my plan had reached a critical point. I felt the strategy of divide and rule gaining strength. I needed to do something this weekend to avoid losing my progress. Their new plans posed a real problem. I couldn't cancel my golf game, and Anne could find an excuse to leave. Touching her car was out of the question. Suspicion could jeopardize everything. I needed a way to get Anne to change her plans at the last minute. Suddenly, a brilliant idea struck me. The perfect solution with just one phone call. I stuck to my routine for the rest of the week, but on Friday night, I slyly swapped Anne's mobile phone battery with a dead one. If she tried calling Mark this weekend, it'd be on her home phone, allowing me to listen in on the conversation. On weekends, Anne and I dress casually. However, when Anne came downstairs on Saturday morning in a beautiful skirt and blouse, I took notice. As my departure time for golf approached, Anne watched me with some apprehension, likely because I hadn't made a move to put on my usual golf pants and shirt. When 10 a.m. came, and I showed no intention of leaving, it was clear she was preparing an excuse for why she needed to leave. Growing impatient, she turned to me, demanding to know if I was playing golf. Then the doorbell rang. Anne, puzzled, opened the door to find her sister Miriam, who Mac had invited for the weekend. The women hugged excitedly. Anne, surprised but pleased, welcomed Miriam. Miriam explained that Mac had invited her at the beginning of the week, since she had no plans. Anne and Miriam, though close, didn't see each other often due to the distance. Anne was delighted to have Miriam there. Turning to me, she realized why I hadn't played golf and appreciated the opportunity for her sister to visit. Inviting Miriam to breakfast, I suggested she might want to change into something more elegant than jeans, although she looked great as she was. Anne blushed, but quickly recovered. I suggested helping Miriam carry her bag to the guest room while she changed, mentioning that I needed to make a quick call. Observing her walking down the corridor, I soon heard some muted curses. When she returned, holding her unresponsive mobile, she expressed frustration about the dead battery. I sympathized, suggesting she could use the home phone, but she dismissed it, stating that the call wasn't important. She then inquired about where we should have breakfast. Over the weekend, I spent time bonding with my sisters, attempting to lift their spirits. As Miriam prepared to leave on Sunday afternoon, she hugged me, expressing gratitude intentionally. She commented to Anne, "You have a special husband." Anne seemed to wince slightly, but she smiled and hugged me, promising that she would. Despite my confidence that Anne had used the weekend to call Mark, I wasn't concerned if it was on our home phone, as I had it recorded. After Anne went to bed on Sunday night, I checked the recording and discovered that the call had taken place early Sunday morning. Anne told Mark about her unexpected sister's visit, explaining why she couldn't meet on Saturday. Their conversation intrigued me. Their disappointment seemed evident, and I felt I had dealt a serious blow to their relationship. Hopefully this would be enough. Confirming my assessment, their emails on Monday showed, "Mark, are we still meeting this week?" Anne, "I don't think so." Mark, "This is getting too troublesome and starting to annoy me. Besides, Mac has been really nice to me lately, and I feel pretty guilty about running to you behind his back. I think we need to get this over with." Mark, "Don't say that." Anne, "At least one more time." Anne, "No, I'm serious, it's over." Mark, "Well, I can't say I'm not disappointed. You're still an attractive lady, but I know what you're talking about. Maybe it's for the best. I don't want to lose Bobby either. But I hope we can still be friends. And of course, we will remain friends, just not friends with privileges. I achieved success by introducing enough issues into their relationship that it crumbled. Now, I only needed to complete the second part of my plan. When Anne returned home that evening, she appeared downcast and preoccupied, occasionally showing signs of tears in her eyes. Not wanting to intrude but feeling the need to address her behavior, I asked with concern if everything was okay and if she was facing any work problems. She responded, "It's okay," avoiding eye contact, and mentioned that she guessed she was just in a bad mood. I nodded, giving her some space. Secretly, I felt triumphant, convinced that she was mourning the end of her relationship with Mark, even though she had chosen to end it. Sensing her sadness, I knew Anne invested emotions into relationships and struggled with the loss. While her mood seemed to settle, I couldn't help but think that Mark wouldn't likely share a similar reaction. Sarcastically, I thought, "He's probably with Bobby right now." The following morning, Anne seemed in much better spirits. Throughout the day, I didn't come across any more messages between Mark and her, reinforcing my belief that neither had changed their minds. It fueled my growing sense of triumph. That evening after dinner, as Anne entered the study, I had an Edgar Allan Poe book in my lap once again. When she inquired about my reading choice and what it was about, I replied that it was one of my favorites, The Cask of Amontillado. Admitting that she didn't know that one, she snuggled up to me and interrupted my reading to express how wonderful a husband I was. She looked into my eyes and said seriously, "You've been so kind to me in the past few weeks, and I feel very fortunate to have you." Her expressions of gratitude made my heart soar, realizing that I had succeeded. This is the moment I've been waiting for. I gazed at her, anticipating more words from her. She paused, and for a moment, a guilty expression flashed across her face. Her eyes appeared slightly moist. She fervently stated, "I really don't deserve you." In response, I calmly said, "No, I don't deserve you." Then I reached for the desk drawer, adding sharply, I tossed photos of her meeting Mark at the motel onto her lap. Initially confused by the change in my tone, she struggled to understand what I had given her. As she focused on the frames and grasped their contents, she began to wail, "Oh my God, no, no!" I handed her a copy of the divorce application my lawyer had filed earlier that day. Her breath caught in her throat. "But I thought isn't there any way?" "No," I coldly interrupted, passing her another stack of papers. "And if you're curious about Mark, here's a copy of the letter I sent to Bobby tonight, along with the detective's report. I also sent a similar letter to your sister Miriam, explaining why I am divorcing you." She moaned in pain and sobbed again. "I just don't understand. You've been so loving and caring all these weeks. I can't believe you're so cruel right now. Does all this mean nothing, my dear?" I said evenly. "When you started your little romance, you put an end to all my love for you. That's why I spent the last few weeks trying to end your relationship with Mark. As for how I treated you, well, I wanted to make sure you understood how much you lost when you betrayed me. My goal was to take away from you the same thing you took from me, and from what I can tell, my plan worked perfectly." Anne collapsed on the sofa, sobbing piteously. Before leaving, I placed the Poe book I was reading on top of the other documents. The text was still open on the Cask of Amontillado, and I used a marker to highlight the passage containing the Montresor family motto, "No one dishonors me with impunity.